Okay.
And then, oh, I don't know how I did this last time in terms of sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try. Can you see my thing?
I can see like the entire page,
Okay, not just the slides.
not just the slide, not only the yeah.
Ugh. Hmm, that's not great. Let me try it again. Can you see the entire page? The slide?
Yes. Yes, now I can. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today. We're gonna wait, I think, a few more minutes or just a couple more minutes and then get going really soon. Okay. Well, welcome and welcome again, everyone. Um, we are going to get started with the first webinar of a three-part series about applying to grad school, everything that you need to know. So this is just going to be a general overview of the process for master's and PhD programs across all disciplines and fields. Our second webinar, and we'll have the QR codes and dates for that for you at the very end of our presentation, will be about writing the personal statement and the diversity statement. And our third webinar will be about interviewing for graduate schools. But without further ado, let's get started with Grad School 101. So here is a rough overview of what we're going to cover today. These are the most common questions that we at OCS get all the time, and probably some of the burning questions that many of you have today. So we'll tackle the first question first. Why grad school? This is this should be a question that you come back to over and over and over again through the process of deciding to apply for grad school, writing the applications, and even during the selection of picking which grad school to go to come the spring or the summer. Many people have different reasons for pursuing grad school, and the reasons also for pursuing a MA program or an MS, a terminal master's, that is, versus a longer term commitment such as a PhD or say like an MD PhD will look different. If we can go to the next slide, Metian. Then these are some of the most common questions that we get, and also questions that we ask students when we meet with them, and questions that we also asked ourselves when we were applying to grad school to consider. So what is at stake? Why grad school? What is behind those considerations? For some people, it's because they want to remain in academia and aim for a teaching or professor or research job. For other people, it is to get a better job offer in the long run. And for others, it's simply to just test out the waters, have a feel of what's out there, and to continue learning because you love your major or you love the kinds of classes and learning opportunities and research that you encountered as an undergrad. This goes hand in hand with the second question of what do I want to do with my degree? And that will definitely also shape whether you apply for a terminal master's, that is a 1 to potentially 3-year master's, versus a PhD, which is typically anywhere between 4 to 6, 7+ years. And we'll get to that in a second. But regardless of what the kind of so what or the afterwards of your graduate degree looks like, one of the most important questions for framing your application, shaping your application, and also to just get you excited for this application process and for applying to grad school is what topics get you truly excited? Like what kind of questions have you encountered in classrooms, in talking to professors, in internships, research, maybe in a performing arts setting, etc., that you want to pursue at a more serious and at a more engaged, deeper level. And this is also a big question, the fourth question, a really important question too, because grad school, as you may have seen by talking to either us, because we're both still grad students here, or to your professors, or to some of your friends or peers who might have gone off to grad school, is that it's not just a degree. It's kind of like undergrad where you do have you may live on campus, but even more so, you have a life around you. And especially for longer term programs like the 6-year plus PhDs that we're now part of, it's a really important consideration of lifestyles and also finances. Are you able to afford being in grad school for, anywhere between 1 to 7+ years? Will there be funding? Will you like the city or region of the country or the world that you're in? Are you close to friends or family? Things like that. And this sometimes shapes your decision of, do I take time off in between undergrad and grad school, or do I take time off in between a master's or a PhD, or am I doing a grad degree because I want to take time off from a job or other commitments that I might have? This actually brings me to the other considerations that one might have. Grad school, we get a lot of this question, and if you think back to undergrad applications, then many of you, likely, including myself, likely had safety schools and safety options. And it is totally common and normal to start the process thinking, oh, maybe I will have several safety schools that I also apply to, other than like my top dream or reach schools. And maybe grad school is that safety option because you're not sure about whether or not you're going to get that job, or whether or not you're going to get a particular fellowship, etc. This is, yes, it is very common, but as we will discuss a little bit later, proceed with caution, because you'll see that grad school applications are deceivingly intense and there are lots of moving parts. And there is also a higher level of specificity and specialization required for these applications than your undergrad applications to be expected, that you also want to take into consideration. Um, Furthermore, we are seeing a complete increase in competitiveness. And I think this is also something that is being talked about just in the everyday sphere, even outside of academia. A lot of people want to do grad school. It is a very nice luxury to be able to do and sometimes even get paid to study what you love. And that's why the competitiveness for a lot of programs, master's and PhD across the board, across the country, and even internationally has gone up, especially since the COVID pandemic. This is something to take into consideration, definitely. Are you willing to take the risk? Do you have the resources and the time to write and create a competitive application? And also, this is something that is very field and program dependent. As we will mention later, grad school is not kind of one size fits all. Even between multiple different programs, analogous programs in the same field. So this is also something to keep looking out for. Finances and funding is a huge thing. We'll discuss this a little bit later as well. But there will be different questions also between a master's and a PhD, whether you're doing it in a US context or whether you're international, going to international schools, or if you're, say, an American citizen applying to domestic schools versus international students applying to US universities. And then finally, as all of us probably are aware, the higher education landscape, including admissions, but also what exactly higher education is, what exactly a university should do or perhaps should not do, has changed very rapidly in the past 4 years. Pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the Supreme Court ruling from last summer, and also recent events in the last several years, as well as looking ahead to the elections. We don't know what's going to change. And part of that is a little bit, could be exciting, but other parts will definitely impact the application. And we see this changing year to year. It's changed since we applied to grad school, and sometimes it does change month to month or week to week. So this is something to definitely keep an eye out for and kind of just prepare yourself even psychologically. So because these applications, there's lots of moving parts, but this is also something to keep in mind when shaping your application and also keeping an eye out for last minute changes. Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Yes, and so of course the big question in the room, the elephant in the room, is also funding. So how are we gonna fund your graduate school? Basically either PhD program or master's, MA or MS. And the question of funding is very different between PhD and master's program. PhD programs are generally the easier questions we get when asking about funding because generally you are not paying to attend PhD programs, although there are school and program specific nuances in terms of what they'll cover, how many years they'll cover, and whether you have to teach in addition to that. Generally, I would say that for a PhD program, you should expect your tuition to be fully covered. In addition, you receive a living stipend for housing and living costs. You should also receive healthcare benefits covered by the program. Some programs will also have childcare benefits as well. So if you are planning to have children during your graduate school year, or you already have children and applying to PhD program, I would also take into account the childcare benefit, daycare, as well as any childcare stipends that you may have. when you're considering which program to apply to, as well as which program to interview at and eventually matriculate into. Also think about, like, in addition to the provided funding, as I mentioned earlier, any stipulation of that funding. Do you need to TA to maintain that stipend? Or if you want to make additional income, in addition, are there teaching fellowships or other jobs within the field that can boost your stipend, for example? For example, at Yale, if you're a teaching fellow, for a semester, it's like $5,000 per semester generally. So that's something to consider. And then there are also many opportunities to apply for fellowship, either the year that you're applying into your PhD program or once you're a PhD student. So applying to fellowship is never a bad idea. This includes the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the NSF, GFRP, the NDSEG from the National Defense and Security Administration, the NDSEG, the Ford Foundation, the Soros, the Knight Hennessy, et cetera, et cetera. There's many programs for PhD fellowship as well. And then, of course, once you're a PhD student, and for a little bit further along your training, you can also apply to NIH fellowship funding as well, if you're within the biomedical scientist realm. And then for master's, and both MA and MS programs, there's generally, funding is generally difficult to obtain, but not impossible for you to get into a funded program. So I would check for each program specifically. So this requires more work for you to check out each program website for any scholarship that you can apply to when you're submitting your application. Some scholarships actually are only made available to you once you have received that offer of acceptance as well. So I would also keep that in mind and indicate your interest. And then there are some fellowships for masters, including the Fulbright, the Mitchell, the Rhodes, which are only fellowships to pay for degree abroad. So when you're thinking about master's program, also consider not only US masters, but masters in the UK and abroad as well. And weighing the benefit and the cons of both for your specific situation. But generally for masters, students generally take out loans, but generally they'll consider a return on investment, because oftentimes when you're going into industry, a master's degree give you a little boost in your annual salary. So it's just usually people kind of weigh the benefit of how much they will cost to get their master's and how many years they'll work to make up for that cost as well. And there are other scholarships very specific to the field as well on the Yale Fellowship website that we can post a link later, where you can go onto the database and look at what available fellowships there are for your specific interest and your program.
Okay, so you've decided to apply. Congratulations. That's already a big milestone there. So now what? The biggest question that we get is how many programs? And if you think back to undergrad applications, many of us applied to dozens of schools, upwards of 10 schools. And for a grad school application, that looks a little bit different. Usually the number hovers on average between 4 to 8 programs. And we've written here in parentheses, consider the financial implications, because first and foremost, applying to grad school is not only a very time-consuming, time-demanding project, it can add up. Normally schools charge between $100 and $150. I've even seen schools get closer to $200 per application. There are certain fee waivers. For example, if you are a federal Pell Grant recipient, you may qualify, or you're a first-generation college student. or have demonstrated need otherwise, you may qualify for a fee waiver, but that also requires an extra step to get to prove, and it is not always guaranteed. Um, but other than the immediate financial considerations of application costs, your list really should be based around your fit to school. You want to find and fit to program. For grad schools, it's really important, PhD and MA, to really make the argument and make the case that your particular set of interests, your particular skill set, and the kinds of questions that you would pursue as a graduate student will be not only an asset to the said program, department, school, but you will be a really good fit in terms of a colleague as well as a community member. Um, Now, how do you determine that? The easiest way to do this is actually talk to people. You likely already, in your point at this point in your academic career, have a really good network of past TFs that you might still keep in touch with. Maybe you even have some graduate student friends, professors, current advisors, past professors that you've gotten along with and you really enjoyed working with, your director of undergraduate studies, potentially even the director of graduate studies in your particular department here at Yale. Um, those people will have a really good sense of that particular field and the particular landscape that you're applying to get into. Of course, we are here to help as well. But since these programs are so specialized and the requirements and the kind of department culture, politics, expectations are really vary field to field, the most accurate gauge about, oh, this is going to be a really good program for you because X person is there and they would be perfect as an MA advisor. Or, this PhD program is particularly strong in this field, which is what you're interested in, so you should apply there. That kind of specificity is only going to be achieved by talking to people in your department or people in the department to which you're hoping to apply to. Um, I've included also potential advisors because it is totally normal, and we will go into this later, to actually email people in the schools that you're hoping to apply to get a sense of what's going on, especially if they come on recommendation from your current or past advisors. This is totally normal. This is totally expected by some people, especially around this time during the academic year. And this is also a great way to start feeling out if that particular school and program indeed is going to be the best fit for you. Um, this also should be accompanied by deal breakers. And this was something that I actually, speaking from personal experience, really did take seriously. I knew that I was going to be in a PhD of 6 to 7 years. And I was also going to be a full-time student living in that city, living close to that campus. So I had a couple deal breakers. This can vary person to person. It can be location, it can be proximity to family, friends, significant others. It can also be department culture, including the kinds of specializations that they have, research topic. It could also be looking at the requirements. Some schools require you to teach 4 semesters, upwards of 4 semesters. Some schools have no teaching requirements. So it really all depends on, again, going back to the initial questions and considerations that we had, what's at stake going to grad school, and what's the so what behind going to grad school. Um, You can do a lot of this evaluation yourself by just going through websites, faculty websites. You can actually, for PhD or MA, you can do this also by going back to publications, say publications that you have encountered in class or in your research, senior thesis, etc. And look at where these professors are. Was there a particular article or book or even like a guest lecturer that who came to Yale that particularly impressed you? Where are they? Where do they teach? What kind of graduate students, what kind of a graduate supervision do they do, etc. Um, this is particularly important, I would say, for STEM, for different reasons with the collaboration, citation count, also funding issues, but also for the humanities and social sciences, smaller departments, where you might be working with this person, on a very close and long-term basis, basically from the first day that you step foot on that campus, even before. For a PhD, this is more important. It goes back to the other requirements. Are you willing to teach a lot? Do you want to mostly do research? Also funding, those kinds of questions will definitely come into play when making your list of programs. For MA and MS, terminal master's programs, that is, the focus of the program overall and more general questions will be of higher importance than the specific advisor that you're working with the exception of schools in the UK or in the EU. That are research programs, not really taught masters, but research masters that require you to join a lab or work closely with a PI or a primary supervisor. Since you will be doing a significant amount of coursework in a traditional taught masters, look at the coursework that is required, what courses are available, who is teaching those courses, and are there specialties that you will be expected to specialize or declare, or specialties that you want to study more of. A question I also ask, and this brings us to our next slide about the safety school question. A rhetorical question I often ask the students that I talk to is, if you have a list of programs, if you only had the option to go to one school on that list, would you be happy going to any school on that list? And if the answer is yes, then you are in a great spot. If the answer is maybe or I'm not sure, then it brings us to exactly how to approach pursuing safety schools and graduate applications. So we've mentioned a couple times before already that especially in PhD programs or research master's programs, you're primarily spending time in one department with 1 to 2, potentially 3 advisors. And this is very different from undergrad programs where you were able to hop around departments and expected actually to a certain degree to hop around departments. So the match between research, career kind of mentorship, what kind of advice they're giving you academically and professionally, and also personality is crucial. So some questions to consider is, where are they in their career? As in, are they a tenured position professor? Are they a tenured track professor, as in they haven't gotten tenure yet, and you're not sure whether they're going to get tenure by the time that you arrive at that school? Or if they are a tenured professor, are they going to retire soon? Or are they planning on taking a sabbatical, a leave, a maternity leave, family leave, etc.? Especially in shorter programs, but also in longer programs, these questions do affect you and the kind and amount of supervision that you're going to get. So these are really great questions to ask and discuss with your potential advisors ahead of time. How do they approach their field? This can be terms of methodology, theoretical approaches, and also just general what is their take on department culture? How do they advise things like that. And what type of mentor fits your needs? There are going to be some professors who are very eager mentors, and you might be somebody who needs just checking in, a more like laid back professor, or you might need the opposite. Or you might need a professor who's going to be able to help you make the transition back into industry, or you might need a professor advisor who's going to get you those letters and who's going to get you a tenure track academic job, or help you at least push for a tenure track academic job. These are all really important considerations to ask. You might not be sure at this moment, but you still can get a kind of feel and be open with potential advisors about, the paths that you are considering at this present moment while applying. Again, cold emailing is totally fine. We can, individual appointments, also discuss and later on give you some pointers of how to email people. And yes, some programs admit as a department and some as individual faculty. This is not standard across the board. It really does depend program to program. So this is definitely also something that you want to check, perhaps with a quick email to the DGS, the Director of Undergrad Studies at the particular department, or by reaching out to a potential advisor.
Okay, so now you've decided to apply to graduate school, medical school. What are the components of a successful application? So generally, the most essential component is your personal statement or a statement of purpose. And we'll go into this a little bit in details in a little bit. But also we have a whole session on personal statement coming up on October 1st. And then the second is your research statement. This is not always required depending on the program, but it is an opportunity for you to talk more about your prior research, what research you've been engaged with, and kind of like boost about your prior research experience and what you want to do more importantly for PhD in your PhD research lab. Recommendation letters, of course, and your transcript and your GPA. Other possible components, so some programs will have optional components and some will not even require it. So this includes the GRE's test scores. Some programs are GRE optional, some are required. For anyone applying to physics, PhD, generally you do need to take the GRE physics test as well. A writing sample, so this is a sample of any prior writing, including peer-reviewed publication, a report that you did, or anything like that. A diversity statement or a teaching statement depends on the focus of the school. These are generally required for PhD programs. However, it's unclear because of, again, the current political climate, anti-DEI legislation. Some programs will actually who used to have requirement for diversity statement may not require it anymore. Or they might have another name for it politically. And then application fee waivers as well. So if you're coming up with financial strain in terms of applying to graduate schools, some schools will have an application for you to waive their application fee, which is substantial, like 100 plus per school. And then some programs will have program-specific prompts. Just usually when I've seen this, it's just short 1 or 2 paragraph prompts that you should be embedded into the application. So the personal statement. We'll quickly go through this because we have a whole session on the personal and diversity statement in a couple of weeks. But logistically, it's the most important component of your application. It's where you tell the admissions committee and the faculty about yourself. Different programs will have different requirements. Some will have a 1 to 2 page requirement, single space. Others will have a word requirement or a character requirement. Usually plus or minus 1 to 2, 1.5 to 2 page or 1,000 words. You should be thinking or drafting your personal statement as early as possible. We recommend, people start it in the summer now, or like early fall, because it's a personal statement is something that you want to get as many feedback as possible, and as many eyes on it as possible, so that you can, at the end, have a very concise and powerful personal statement that will basically advocate and like basically tell the admissions committee and the faculty who you are on like 2 pages essentially. And as we all know, it takes a while for people to get back to you with feedback. And you want people not to just read this in 5 minutes, but be able to have the time to sit down and provide feedback. And the sooner you have a draft and get it to people who like either the writing center, your advisor, a friend, the more time they'll have to give feedback, and multiple rounds of feedback in that. Your personal statement, this is where you can address anything that is not addressable elsewhere. So any extraordinary circumstances or any questionable aspect of your application. If your GPA, if you think your GPA is not as high as you want it to be, if something came up one semester and your science GPA, for example, was particularly low, here's where you can address all of those circumstances and demonstrate how, when faced with these challenges, these unexpected circumstances, allowing you to grow and learn from this experience, and how you'll utilize those skills in terms of overcoming those challenges into your future trainee as a master's or a PhD student. You can also, with these extraordinary circumstances, ask your letter of writers to address these if they're aware of it, if they've seen you through the whole process, in terms of kind of advising you through it and speak about your strength, and your perseverance and your grit. Or sometimes there is a additional prompt that you can write these extraordinary circumstances into. And then, so the content, this is something that I would let marinate for a little bit. Your personal statement should be answering a few key questions. First, something that these questions should basically address things we've talked about so far, meaning why do you want to go to grad school? What is your reason for going to the specific field? How will grad school prepare you for the career that you want? How will the specific program you're applying into will provide the necessary professional development and training skills that will prepare you to be, if you want to go into academia, like the best PI that you can be, or achieve the best funding that you can get. What type of research or field excite you? What type of research questions? And along with that, who are the faculty at that program that are answering those similar questions that are able to guide you through answering those type of questions. So identifying like research with, or not identifying, aligning your research with the research of the program or specific faculty in those programs is always a meaningful way of approaching your personal statement. And then of course, why the program? So faculty members, any specific professional development support that you're particularly excited about, any faculty member who's doing, or basically your role model doing what you want to do. And so you want to, be there so that you can be mentored and gain experience from their mentorship. And then what you're hoping to gain from the program, your career goals, making sure that you highlight the alignment between the program goals and your career goals as well. So the statement, in essence, is an intellectual autobiography, a cover letter, and an argument-driven narrative about the program and your research compatibility, all into one. And so we're trying, for the personal statement, you're trying to fit a lot in to that 2-page, 1,000-word max. So this is where starting early, having a lot of feedback from different perspectives, either a writing coach, your research advisor currently, friends, etc., would be really, really important to hone in on that very purposeful research statement at the end. And lastly, and most importantly, when you're writing your research statement, your personal statement, present yourself as a future colleague. Basically imagine that if you have a faculty advisor, like write in a conversation with them. If you ever spoke to a faculty at that school or that program, if you spoke to a faculty at that program, you have an inside look into the type of research question, the future direction of the research within that program. So I would weave that into the personal statement as well.
Okay, so we're now coming to rec letters, which is also a very important part of your application because this is where you get close advisors, as in faculty members, research or organization advisors, past internship directors, managers, bosses, etc., to also pitch a case as to why you are qualified for that particular program or department. So in terms of rec letters, the more specific the person can get, the better. They're basically crafting a 1 to 2 page letter that is an argumentative piece stating their reasons for why you are qualified for the particular research that you have proposed to do, as well as what kind of community member, student, colleague, advisee, and potentially mentor to other students that you're going to be in that department. That's why in terms of faculty members, it's actually better to get a person who knows a professor here who knows you very well as a person, not just somebody who you took a big lecture course with and got an A, but actually was graded by a TF or a postdoc. That actually brings me to another very important point that I get a lot of questions about. Only professors, as in tenure track or tenured professors, may write letters of recommendation for you. As much as we would like to, graduate students, PhD students, postdocs may not write letters of recommendation in this particular case. So again, if you had a TF grader in a large lecture class instead of a professor, think about instead which classes or which scenarios you've gotten to know professors and in which professors you've gotten to know in smaller, more tight-knit, closer settings. It's typically good practice to send them a draft of a personal statement, CV, or transcript. For your primary advisor, you might already be doing this, but this is really for people who might not know you as well, or you might not have stayed in contact with, or it's been a couple of years since you reached out to them. That's okay. They just need to have the most current information about you in order to write a really persuasive letter of recommendation. Also for non-academic writers, that's okay. And actually in some cases of master's programs, it is recommended or common practice to get non-academic writers, but they just might need some suggestions. Obviously, you can't read their letter, but just suggestions about points that you want them to highlight. Is it a particular project that you worked on? Is it a particular skill set that you developed at that particular job or organization, etc.? You generally need 3. Some master's programs only require 2, but it's good to have 3, one as a potential backup in case a person says that they do not have time to write, or they unfortunately are a bit flakier than you expected, and you're searching for an alternative closer to the deadline. Think about when you're curating these recommendations, think about different parts of your story that you want to highlight, and think about the best combination that speaks to all your strengths that highlight, you as an academic, a professional, and also you as a person. Asking people, faculty, or other people for multiple recommendations is totally fine and expected in some cases, but I would consider sending them an Excel sheet or some other way to keep track of deadlines because they also will likely be writing rec letters for a slew of other people along with all the other tasks that they need to do during the academic year. So a couple pushes or a couple gentle reminders might be necessary as you approach the 2-month mark before the application and then the 3-week mark before submitting applications. In general, schools are a little bit understanding if there's like a couple day period as long as your part of the application is in, but for peace of mind, for psychological comfort, and also just to, set your best foot forward, it's good practice to have these recommendations in around the same time as your application. And then also keep them updated. These people they believe in you. That's why they're writing recommendations for you. And they also might become your future colleagues in several years' time. So do send them updates, send them thank you notes, and let them know what happened with your applications after they've submitted.
Yeah, and the next component of your application is your transcript and your GPA. So your transcript is something that basically convey your preparedness for graduate school, that you're able to think critically, and that you've gained some knowledge about the field or have shown interest in the field. Having a good GPA is just one way of doing this in terms of showing that you've able to think critically and can perform well in class, in academic classes. And this is GPA is more particularly important for class-based masters because one, they want to have the safe like mindfulness of you essentially being able to take and pass the classes during your master's. But then for your PhD as well, your first 1 or 2 years will be in class work. So just, proving that you can take classes, think critically, and be able to pass them essentially. However, even though your undergrad major may not be similar to what you're applying into, transitioning fields is very, very common. So you don't need to panic and be like, oh, do I have to repeat undergrad again? You don't. But you do need to justify your decision to change from, for example, stats to engineering, for example. And so this is where your personal statement is so important in terms of your transition. And you can weave a lot of interdisciplinary research and crosswalk work here as well, because nowadays research is done in a very interdisciplinary way. That's easy, very common and easy, relatively easy to argue for that transition. So in addition, do research on your programs to see if there's any specific coursework or skills that you might require, either a stats class, for example, or a coding language, or theory classes or some languages, etc. So that you can ensure that you're eligible to apply to the program you're applying to, or you can weave that class into either your fall semester or your spring semester coursework at the end of your undergrad training. In general, though, if you go to a grad school without a master ahead of time, you're going to take classes anyways. And grad school is where you're gonna really learn more deeply about the field that you're going into. So no one is expecting you to know everything about the field. They just want to see an indication of your interest, whether that's in classes or whether that's in the research in the field in general.
Okay, the big scary monster, the GRE. There's a lot of commotion around GRE, especially since there's been talk about standardized testing. Is it coming back? Is it going away for good? Since the pandemic. So the good news is that for many fields, especially in the humanities, arts, and social sciences, and also international programs, the GRE is either not required at all. Some programs will actually actively discourage you from taking the GRE, or typically a formality. The transcript and the rec letters and the personal statement will speak volumes more than a test score from the GRE. However, some programs still do require the GRE or a GRE subject test. This is note that we did not say fields, it's programs. So this is another consideration that some students have when curating a list of programs. If you have a list of say 7 schools and there's one school that does require a GRE, do I really, really, really want to go to this school that requires a GRE? As in, is it worth taking the GRE for this one school? And the answer can really depend. The GRE is now all online, as is all practice material. Really, you can get a test book or you can download one from online and check out the material. You generally don't need a lot of preparation time for this, but if you are taking the GRE, especially if you need the essay, the writing section, when you're going to like a STEM program or or even some social science programs. Practice for like a month or two and include this in your application timeline so that you can put your best foot forward, as well as feel comfortable taking the test because it's not difficult. And especially, we were just talking the level of the math, especially if you're applying for STEM programs, is most definitely not at the level of math that all of you are doing, but it's just getting used to the format and the form of the test. Yeah, that's basically it for GRE. It really is dependent on everybody's case. So there's not one overarching, like one size fits all advice for the GRE at this point.
Okay, so you understand what goes into your application. So when should you start? I would say now, or as soon as possible. So now you can start identifying your field, beginning to make a list of the programs and advisors, keeping a spreadsheet of programs that you research, for inspiration about, which program you should consider, etc. Talk to your faculty, your TA, alumni of the program, your research lab members, ask them what programs they, especially people who just went through the application cycle, so first-year grad students, what programs they really enjoyed, they applied to, why, et cetera, et cetera. And then determine your testing requirement. Do you need to take the GRE? Do you need to take the GRE subject tests, including physics? Preparing for that, starting to plan for it, and then preparing, making time either during your fall break or sometime during school at the end of the semester to take the GRE if you need to take it. And then, of course, anticipating the cost of application. Application fees can range. The lowest I've seen is 50, the highest 150. And if you're applying to multiple programs, that can add up really quickly. Research whether the fee waiver applications for the program, some of them have deadlines, so applying to them early. Whether you need to pay Yale a transcription fee, whether the program itself can take an unofficial transcript versus an official transcript. The official one is usually the one associated with fees. The test costs of taking the GRE, the expenses of getting a prep book, etc. And then research also funding options for your program, anything you need to apply to as well. So mapping out really your timeline for the next 6 months or so, in terms of funding and things like that. And then, of course, start thinking about and drafting your personal statement, because as we said, the sooner you get that drafted, the better. And then in the early fall, start reaching out to faculty here at Yale to talk about your desire to do PhD or master's, as well as the program that you're interested in. Because we live in a very digital world now, and jumping on a 15-minute Zoom is so easy. Reaching out to faculty and other programs and asking them to jump on Zoom for 15-30 minutes so that you can ask questions about the research future directions, to learn more about the program. That's very easy to do and wouldn't hurt. It actually you will be able to, by doing that, get information to boost your personal statement. And then, of course, get feedback, making edits to your personal statement draft. We'll talk more about personal statement in a couple of weeks. And then also, if a writing sample is required, consider which writing sample to include. Finalize your list of programs. There's no magic number, as Shannon said earlier, but generally people apply to 6 to 7, but it's also field dependent. I know some people apply to 10, some people apply to less. Request your letter of rec as early as possible. People are busy, and the more we get into the end of the semester, the busier people tend to get, especially starting with the first set of exams. So asking people early and then, following up subsequently is always key. And of course, know your deadlines. Highly recommend a spreadsheet with multiple tabs of programs, timelines, etc. And so this is where you can also create a spreadsheet for your recommenders about their specific deadlines. And then when we get to the end of the semester, this is where you can, when you can request transcript from the registrar to send to the programs, finalize your statement and your writing samples, and then send them in. Recognize that different schools will require different versions of your of your personal statement, and we'll talk about that more. But keep track of which statement belongs to which school. There's multiple systems for this, but do keep that in mind. Confirm your letter of recs and your test score that they are received by the program and the department. This is the time also where financial aid application, the FAFSA, and some fellowship application are also due, like the Ford Pre-Doc Fellowship and the NSF. So keeping in mind that the application cycle for PhD is also the same time as these fellowship applications. So there's a lot going on. So it would really help for you to create that spreadsheet again with the deadlines. And then, of course, submit as soon as you can. Don't wait until 11:59 p.m., the day that is due, because you'll always run into technical errors. And it's always like, it's good to be prepared rather than panicking at midnight. And then after submission, you can send your fall transcript if necessary, especially if you're taking classes this fall that are pertinent to the field that you're applying to. Acceptances usually go out in January to March. Visiting schools, generally your second look is if you're applying to PhD program, they're generally fully funded. Sometimes there's an interview component, most of the time not. This usually happens between February and April before the decision deadline, which is April 15. And then once you have your list of acceptances and wait lists, evaluate them, talk to the faculty of the program, talk to us. We can help kind of map that out a little bit for you based on an individual to individual basis. And yeah, so we have 2 upcoming workshops in October. The first is writing your personal and diversity statement on October 1st at 5:30 p.m. So same day, same time, in a couple of weeks, online via Zoom. You can use this barcode here, QR code here to register for the webinar then. And then our second is right before you submit your application in terms of talking about preparing you for the graduate school interviews and what that would look like on Tuesday, October 22nd at 5:30 p.m. And also the link to register is here as well. And we will have a couple of minutes for questions.
There was already one question that came in the Q&A, and that was related to rec letters, namely, can lecturers or non-tenure track faculty write letters? That's a really good question, and it really does depend. In some fields, like for example, in my field, which is a language and literatures department, senior lecturers run the language program. And senior lecturers are basically some of them have the rank of faculty. In that case, yes, or rank of professor. In that case, yes, absolutely, especially say if you are applying to, say, a program, just using my field as an example, a program that is related to second language acquisition, and you've worked with the senior lecturer for that particular language, then absolutely. Some cases also with arts departments, performing and visual arts or architecture, there are lots of lecturers who also have a rank of a professor. In other departments, it's not necessarily the same case. So I would say if you have any questions, ask somebody in your department, like a senior ranking professor, the DGS of the department, to get their take on whether it would be appropriate, especially for your particular case of application, to request letters of recommendation from non-tenure track faculty and or lecturers.
And then, of course, this process is a long one. So you can set yourself up well for success. You can contact Janice or I through the Yale career link, make an appointment, or email us. We're really happy to meet with you to answer any questions or meet with you individually to discuss your individual unique situation and any questions you have.
And we hope to see you at our next event at the Personal Statement and Diversity Statement Writing Workshop. Thank you all so much for coming today, taking time out from your Tuesday evening, and good luck.